Hello, folks. This is Ross Fleming of Fleming Recordings Nelson, makers of personal phonograph records, especially those of the Kootenay Music Festival, bringing you another program of Kootenay talent and early-day Kootenay history, broadcast as a public service in cooperation with the 3 Kootenay radio stations under the titles Fleming Presents over Radio CKLN Nelson, Salute to the Kootenays over Radio CJAT Trail, and Tales of the Kootenays over Radio CKEK Cranbrook. From the 1962 Kootenay Music Festival held in Nelson, the Grade 6 Central School Choir, Nelson, sings A, The Songbird's Jubilation by Horton, and B, Lost Time by Brook, for which they received 83 and 84 marks in the class for school choirs grades 5 and 6. Adjudicator Guston said that in the first piece they had good tone and tempo and were warm and relaxed. In the second they had a sensible tempo with clear words. That was the Nelson Central School Choir, Grade 6, Miss Greta Curwen conducting. The name of Ike Lougheed has been mentioned in some of our early day stories as one of the first pioneers. His version of the finding of the Silver King mine rather agrees with the story that the ore was discovered by the boys in the Hull party when they were rounding up the horses to return home. Now here's an interview with Ike Lougheed published in the Nelson Daily News on October the 19th, 1924, 40 years ago. Ike Lougheed tells of early days of Nelson. Paddled down our lakes when locality was a bush-covered slope. Anderson staked site of Fairview. Tell you how Nelson appeared when I first came here in 1885? Why, there wasn't any Nelson. All I saw was the tree-covered mountain slopes where Nelson one day was to be an attractive-looking place. Oh no, it didn't look much different to any other mountain side, except that the slope was a little more gradual than in most places along the Kootenay River. Ike Lougheed was sitting in the Queen's Hotel a few days ago telling of early days in the Kootenays and of his first trip down the Arrow Lakes and up the Kootenay River. That was in the spring of 1885, the year Gordon was massacred at Khartoum, the year Louis Riel was hanged, and the year in which it was announced Gladstone's Home Rule policy. But those matters were not bothering Mr. Lougheed very much. Young and full of ardor for prospecting, he was looking for El Dorado, confident he would find it among the mountains of mineral of which rumors had reached the Canadian Pacific Railway main line construction camps where he had been working. Rumors which the boys had discussed evening after evening around their campfires. He and Jack Evans, a kindred adventurous spirit, had paddled down the Arrow Lakes prospecting as they came. They landed at what became known as Sproat's Landing, walked beside the river to where Nelson now stands, and after some prospecting had to turn back, as they had no boat with which to travel up the West Arm. It was getting late in the season anyway, and Lougheed and Evans decided to winter at the Little Dalles on the Columbia River, south of the international boundary line, near where Northport is today. They spent the winter at a little hotel at the Little Dalles, which was run by Peter Ellison, who also kept the local store. Ellison later became watchman on the steamer Kootenay, which had been built at the Little Dalles in the spring of 1885. Captain Pinkston was the skipper, and the boat was operated between Revelstoke and the Little Dalles. It was on her that Lougheed and Evans went down to the Little Dalles in the fall of '85. Some say no steamer ever ran through the Little Dalles, but that is wrong. The Kootenay made 3 or 4 trips up and down that winter, said Mr. Lougheed. Mr. Lougheed was clear in his recollections of the early days. The romance of the discovery of the Silver King was particularly vivid in his mind. In the spring of 1886, the Hall brothers' party, led by a guide who didn't know the country, but who had hoped to earn an honest penny or two by persuading the Hall brothers that he knew of rich ore and could lead them to it, pushed up the Salmon River, having started from Colville, Washington. They soon discovered that their guide was as ignorant of the country as they were, and history does not record what happened to him. He is said to have made his way back to the States. The outcropping of the Silver King mine was stumbled on when the members of the party were seeking their horses, which they had lost. They did not stake the claims at that time because they had no miner's license. They returned to Colville, and while all the members of the party were pledged to secrecy, the secret leaked out. And next spring, when they started back to stake the Silver King, several people followed them. Jack Fox and Mike Keeley, the latter grub-staked by Aaron Kelly, arrived at the Silver King ground a day or so after the Halls had staked it. They made some locations, including the Dandy, a claim which provided Dandy Kelly with his nickname. When word reached Revelstoke of the discovery, Gilbert Malcolm Sproat, government agent, sent John Kirkup, who later became at Rossland the most famous of British Columbia government agents, to protect the interests of the province. In the meantime, Arthur Bunting of Bonner's Ferry had staked as a preemption the town site which later became Nelson. Sproat came down in 1888 and bluffed him out of it. Sproat was a justice of the peace. Judge Sproat, with the declaration that the government had previously reserved the land for a town site, was too much for Bunting, and he compromised by selling a couple of shacks he had built for $125 and got out. M.S. Davis acted for Kirkup and Sproat in buying the shacks and encouraging Bunting to quit. In 1888, Sproat named the place Salisbury, after the then Premier of Great Britain. Finding out that another place in Canada possessed this honour, Sproat renamed it Stanley, after the Governor-General of Canada. But the second choice was no more fortunate. There was another Stanley in Canada. So he dropped to a mere lieutenant governor for the third choice and named the town site Nelson after Sir Hugh Nelson, then occupant of the Government House at Victoria. The name sticks in spite of the existence of a Nelson in New Brunswick. Mr. Lockheed suggests that the Nelson in New Brunswick was named after the victor of Trafalgar, so that there was no imitation as far as this town site was concerned. That was also the case of Nelson, Ontario, and Nelson, Manitoba. In the same year, Sproat instructed Harry Anderson to stake another government town site, covering what was later to become known as Fairview. Anderson was provincial constable at Hot Springs, now known as Ainsworth. It was he who arrested Sproul, and who was hanged for the murder of Hamill at the Bluebell mine. Anderson staked the town site, but he recorded it in his own name, instead of it being in that of the province. Anderson sold the town site to a Victoria syndicate, including Josh Davis, Sayward, and E. Crow Baker. Harold Sellew, still a resident of Nelson, had the contract to clear the land and survey it in lots. In the winter of 1890, Davis auctioned the lots in Victoria and called the new Fairview town site the city of Nelson. In the spring of 1890, John Hewson, C.H. Inc., and Dave Allen came in from Bonner's Ferry to publish a paper, but they had to wait for some time for press and type, which had to come from Donald, where they had been publishing the truth, and which was brought in via Sproat's Landing. It was Hewson who dubbed Fairview Bogastown. In 1889, Newland Hoover staked the Hoover Addition to the south of the city as a preemption. He sold to a Vancouver syndicate, two of whom were Captain Phil Thompson and F.M. Innes. J. Fred Hume staked the Hume Addition in 1889. This was located between the original town site and Fairview. Mr. Hume, who is now Nelson representative of the Liquor Control Board, a few later became a Minister of Mines in the Semlin government. He sold the Hume Addition town site to M.S. Davis, who plotted it and sold it as lots. Next week, we will conclude the interview with Ike Lockheed. Back to the 1962 Kootenay Music Festival, Wendy Herbison of Argenta plays as a violin solo the second movement Adagio of Concerto in G minor by Brook, for which she received 86 marks in the class for strings under 19 years. Adjudicator Guston said that this was a sensitive, polished performance with a warm tone beautifully sustained. That was Wendy Herbison of Argenta. Next, Louise Burns, then of Nelson, now of Kaslo, sings A, O Peace, Thou Fairest Child of Heaven, by Arne, and B, What's in the Air Today, by Eaton, for which she received 83 and 88 marks in the class for lyric soprano open. Adjudicator Vandergroot said that she had the right sincerity and the right simplicity. That was Louise Burns of Kaslo. And now I have an important announcement to make. After 4 years of broadcasting festival performances and stories about the early days of the Kootenay district, I have decided to take a holiday. Nelson not having a festival in 1964 has deprived this program of its source of music and spoken poetry, which forms the principal part of our material. In the days to follow, I hope to organize my historical material to better advantage and possibly put something into print. And so it is time to say so long till next Sunday, when we will make our final bow for the season. This is Ross Fleming speaking for Fleming Recordings Nelson and saying,
So long, au revoir, arrivederci, until we meet again. So long, au revoir, arrivederci, until that moment when arrivederci, your sweet I do makes all my dreams come true, and side by side we'll live our whole life through. So long, au revoir, arrivederci, until we meet again. And side by side we'll live our whole